Distant hills in eastern Texas with pine forests, endless plains. Many camps once promised to salvage the cursed. Between 1845 and 1881, over 300 souls participated in these expiation camps. I apologize for their guilt. A handful of Reba survived. Survivors. He spoke in the whispers of the ritual of cleansing, and death seemed extremely merciful. Federal government. Investigators who ultimately violated these camps in 1881 discovered something from afar. It's more frightening than religious fanaticism. A secret cemetery containing the remains. Of the nearly 200 victims, each contains signs of long torture. But what? They are private accountants of the family and the foundations of justice restrictions, and opening a criminal business is so complicated that it hasn't been seen for over 30 years. Tonight, we will find the perfect story of the most successful serial killer in history of the American border and perverted salvation. They offered hopeless and awful. Please forgive me before continuing the history of their terrorist rule with aggravated families disguised as salvation. Please ask something. This channel is not for anyone. Only for these, bold enough to fill the darkest chapters. American Story. If you're one of the few people who face similar stories, please click this subscription button and let us know in the comments you are listening to. Certainly, what we're going. Disclosure challenges everything you think you know about faith, justice, and ransom prices. American border. The year was 1845, and Texas joined the Union almost 10 years later as the 28th state. Independent republic. The border was a wide area without laws. Desperate men and women escaped the past, looking for exposure and ruins. Also, it was a land where human words were his connections and justice was. A place where we frequently arrived at the edge of the rope, and religious enthusiasm burned as hot as the summer sun, along a dusty road. This is due to the sparse colonies scattered all over the 100 kilometers, the words of the three brothers. He proposed something valuable to damned. Immediate salvation by cleaning the meat. Curse. Family. Malahi preacher. Evangelist Cornelius. Prophet Jeboshi. He arrived in Texas to Arkansas in early 1845. Various Baptist and Methodist communities in the South. Malahi preacher C-stroke 6T. With sharp gray eyes, it seemed to be visible directly to the human soul. The dark hair was always perfectly well locked up, and his voice had another world quality that could make a hardened killer. I cry like a child. At 35, he was 3 seniors and charismatic. Brothers who leave the public and bring in frightened sermons. I was excited. Cornelius, a 2-year-old young evangelist, had the supernatural ability to read. Wine is written on people's faces. He was able to identify a person's specific crimes. With such accuracy, many thought he had supernatural powers. His thin frame and the empty cheeks gave it an aesthetic appearance, which improved its reputation for spiritual understanding. Cornelius specialized in what his brothers called for confessional extraction. Make sure to reveal their darkest secrets to the sinners. Brother, Prophet Zebodiah, said he received a vision directly from the Almighty. He was 28 years old. It was built like a blacksmith with huge hands. According to him, it has the ability to heal. His role was to control the physical aspects of cleaning, ensuring that each penado has received accurate levels of suffering. The crime was sought. Together, they created a network of expiation camps along the most remote areas. East Texas, Cypress Swamp, encountered a pen and civilization. I felt like a distant memory. The camp looked modest on the outside on the canvas. Tent in perfect circle around a rough wooden cross with central fire. A hole in which the brothers preached their hopeless souls at a meeting. Cleonel was exactly like that. Expect the border. The cowboys escape excavation, and prostitutes are searching. Escape from the brutal owner of a brothel house. Player drowned in an insurmountable duty. Murderer flees from vigilance. Justice and escapers in both the Mexican War and the various Indian conflicts. But it also attracted camping. The unbelievable number of citizens, traders are guilty. Scams, Politicians fled from corruption scandals, and more. A researcher from the Department of Psychic who heard the reputation of his brothers. For a great transformation, the Muditz brothers preached the intense gospel of violent, merciless, instant cleaning. The nature of border life. Sin must be burned, just as shaved in a fire. His voice echoed through the pines as the flames danced with his angled face. You have to do meat. We suffer so that our heart can move away from eternal glory. There is no label for salvation, only the narrow path of pain. This leads to paradise. Their reputation for creating miraculous transformations. Distribution across Texas and neighboring states. According to signs that appear regularly. Border newspaper. The man enters camp as a hardened criminal. A new piece that is as soft as a lamb, as clean as snow in a mountain, ready to spread. The gospel with the farthest horn of the earth. It was a naked August night. In 1847, the first vigilance report began to appear, but little has been paid. Be careful at that point. A cow driver named Samuel Hartwell stumbled. Marshall, Texas, barely alive, speaking in a horrifying whisper. The fact that he witnessed an exposed camp next to the mysterious seas of Lake Cad. Hartwell. The appearance shocked those who knew him before his spiritual journey. Then trusted to his 30th birthday. Now he was exhausted and premature of age. His completely white hair. His hands tremble out of control. And the unexpected sound made me tremble with embarrassment. His eyes were one day the most surprising. Bravely. Now they maintain the quality of the sky with ghosts. The story is fragmented and told between trembling boots and catatonic moments. Silence lasts for several hours. According to the local pastor who took him to E.W., Hartwell would wake up every night, shouting about the pit, and a cry that never stops. At his clear moment, he told me he had arrived at the research camp. Sorry for killing people in the living room for a controversial card game. They said the pain would cleanse my soul. Hartwell whispered to the pastor. William Matthew. His voice was barely heard in the silence of the church. Mara's brother looked at me. My eyes told me what I did. Not only murder, but also things. I never mentioned another living soul. He knew the money I stole. My mother before leaving Arkansas. He knew a woman I was pregnant with a new one. Olin. He knew everything. According to the Hartwell account, purification. The process immediately started when he arrived at the camp. New penitents have been deprived of all the possessions, including their clothes, and they gave coarse twin dresses to carry. They then had to admit not only to the crime of bringing them to the camp, but also to their respective guilts. When they did, they played because it was insignificant. The Cornelius brothers are sitting in front. You remember Hartwell in this book. His voice acquires monotonous quality. It's like words of memory. He writes everything you said, and if he suspects you had. Back, the brothers of Z-Body used his gift to help you remember. These hands. He can cause pain you could never imagine. The recognition process can take several days, or even weeks, depending on the integrity of the prison. It was only when the brothers were convinced of their sins. The physical cleaning attracted attention. It started. I finished 7 fast days with water and repented during that time. They were forced to dig his grave as a symbol of their spiritual death. Hunger was nothing compared to what appeared more. Hartwell continued, and as he remembered, his whole body began to tremble. Memory. They called this a fire test. Leather whip. They sewed pieces of metal. Each eyelash should have represented a particular sin that stood out from you. Meat, but lasted for hours, sometimes days. However, physical torture. It was only a start. Hartwell described the ritual burial in which penetrate was placed in the grave. He digs, covering the dirt, leaving only his exposed face. They will remain buried in different lengths. Time, sometimes minutes, sometimes hours while brothers pray. They were declared their spiritual death. Some of them have never come. Chichota Hartwell, his eyes are wide, with memorable fear. Mala's brother is held in the grave and declared. They are completely cleaned. He said they were called homes for their glory. But I saw their faces as they passed. There were no one there, and it was just absolute fear. The most frightening aspect of Hartwell's story of Hartwell was his explanation. He did not survive the cleaning process. According to him, brothers, he argued that death during the cleansing was a final blessing, evidence that a person has reached it. Such a complete spiritual cleanup has God called them directly to paradise. They had a special ceremony for those who died. Hartwell recalled that Malahi's brother read the Bible between Gavilia's brothers, cover the grave, then they plant a wooden cross and add the name of a person to what he called the roll. It's broken. They said these souls were lucky. They missed purgatory completely. Marshall's local government initially rejected Hartwell's history as follows: nonsense of someone broken by guilt and limited insanity. Finally, no one had it. He came and reported that he had disappeared, and the cursed brothers had impeccable power. They wore it. Recommendations and criticisms from churches in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Recognizes family members whose relatives have been transformed by the ministry. Sheriff Tom Bradley is a practical person who saw a share of violence at the border. That was especially skeptical. The border is full of men running from something. He told Pastor Matthews, "It seems Hartwell received religion in a difficult way, and his heart broke under tension. These Renaissance preachers can be very enthusiastic, but they kill it. Serious accusations of doing without evidence." The case was gently lowered, and after a month, Hartwell himself, "It's gone." Some said he had moved to California. Others said he was back in Arkansas. Pastor Matthews suspected. More ominous, but without evidence he could not do anything. "I continued to work without camping." Their reputation for intervention, miraculous transformation, increases with each past season. But Hartwell, the disappearance was just the beginning of a model that would appear in the next few decades. How the moon has changed. Over the years, legend of miraculous calls from cursed families, South and beyond. They claimed they saved more than 1,000 souls and changed the most solidified ones. Criminals among model citizens who went to distribute the gospel. Dangerous corners of the border. Revised letters that arrived regularly in a newspaper in Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Praises his brother's work and explains his deep spirit. Conversion. The witnesses followed a very consistent program. A hopeless sinner. You arrive at the expiation camp and are subject to the cleaning process. He appears as a completely new person. A few weeks after their transformation, they felt they were asked to work on missionary work in California's distant territory, deep in Oregon, the Rocky Mountains, or India's territory. The final letter to the family spoke about them. The overwhelming desire to inaccessible salvation and often asked financial support for their evangelization. The brothers explained, "It's like the next God's call to create a new population, but monitoring their activities, it was almost impossible for law enforcement and was already thin on the territory. A huge boundary." The explanation of the family that sent us was even more surprising. Sons and daughters at camp to receive letters in a few months. Their loved ones were so transformed by the fact that they presumed they were called to missionary work. Distant territory. These families have never seen or heard of them, but the brothers are still. He had an explanation and often forged letters describing their absence. Errolyn Westbrook of New Orleans was one of the first to declare his son Thomas as his brother. After entering the Rankin camp near Shreveport in 1849, drug addicts, whose debts increased, disappeared. Initially, she received regular letters explaining her spiritual transformation and her increasing desire to spread the gospel. In California, the letter contained enough personal data to convince their credibility and Thomas. He sought money to support his missionary work. I was pleased at first, Madame Westbrook will be later. Tell the investigator. Thomas managed along the dark path. The letter suggests that he found salvation, but something in writing bored me. It looked like Thomas's letters, but there were subtle differences as he formed some. Letters, sentences he used. I suspected that someone was copying my style. When Westbrook hired a private investigator to find his son in California, the outcome was deep. Neither of the local churches or missions Thomas affirmed work there. The address he provided in his letter was absent or occupied by anyone who had never heard of Thomas Westbrook or his missionary work. Similar stories are beginning to appear throughout the region. Dr. Elizabeth Thornton, a travel doctor who belonged to several survivors of the camp, he began to notice an astonishing plan in their symptoms. They had signs of serious injuries. He then testifies to the Union Court. It's not a spiritually redeemed, peaceful face. It's the sky. Look at those who witnessed unexpressible fears. Some survivors, people who have returned to civilization, men and women have really changed. Like a brother. They talk a little and start with a sudden noise. They seem to be burdened with knowledge, but it was too bad to share. The most worrying thing was their universal unwillingness. They discuss their camp time as if bound by the troublesome vows of silence. Dr. Thornton recorded several cases that were particularly disturbed. Jacob Miller, a former criminal who survived the cleaning process. Symptoms she saw among soldiers who witnessed the worst atrocities of the war. He would have woken up. Pitt and the ascent ceremony, she pointed out in the magazine. When you press to get more information, it is said that certain forms of salvation are only offered at a price that is too expensive. Another survivor, woman with name Sarah Colby, was looking for expiation after continuing the kids' prostitution life, returned from his previous family to his broken sink. Myself. She watched nothing for hours, her sister Mary said. Sometimes she whispered in prayer, but they were just normal prayers. She will ask God to forgive him for things. She saw it, not what she did. This is probably the most important indicator. Methodist Reverend Peter Hawkins volunteered to observe. The Cursed brothers made their own methods to include their ministry. Hawkins entered the camp not as a penitent, but as a spiritual and observer leader. But he emerged from the same thing. He was injured just like any other survivor. There is a form of evil to mask as justice, Hawkins told Dr. Thornton in one of his sessions. I went for inspiration for my ministry, and I found something which shocked my belief in its essence. The brothers aren't the servant of God. It's completely different and uses our deepest spiritual needs as a weapon to us. When the details persist, Hawkins just said it was true. The purpose of the camp had nothing to do with salvation and everything related to the functioning of the most vulnerable people. A member of the company. He spoke and refused to clarify it. The truth is that they only risked others who could feel the temptation to investigate. Models of mysterious lost and injured survivors continued. The 1850s to the 1860s. But the Civil War turmoil is stipulated. A perfect blanket to decorate your siblings. Equipped with all evacuation groups and communication systems. I destroyed it, which made it even easier for people to disappear without explanation. But the end of the war caused new problems with the brothers. An opportunity for those looking to display crime. In the spring of 1879, almost 15 years after the conflict ended, Young, Texas, James Morrison Grantine begins investigating the missing relationship. People in eastern Texas. Morrison was a systematic person with a background. On military information, he noticed that others were missing, an example of loss of which seemed to follow the movement of the expiation obstacle camp, like a shadow on the other side of the border. Morrison was appointed in the case after receiving an official complaint from Senator Charles Whitman of Louisiana. The nephew disappeared after entering a cursed camp near the Texas border. Unlike previous research, this was done by local disabled persons and jurisdiction sheriffs. Morrison was in power, funding for a complete, multivariate survey. Here, something undeveloped, Morrison wrote in his original report the seat of the Austin Ranger. Yvette, more than 60 cases of missing persons have only been documented for the past 3 years. These campgrounds are associated with camps. It is not considered for years, or from other states. The recording is incomplete. The Morrison investigation led to interviews with dozens of families who lost contact. After entering the camp, I went with my parents. The story was amazing. Resemble. Fans seek expiation in the cursed camp. The response continues. A few weeks explaining their mental transformation, then suddenly stops. The final letter explains the call for remote missionary work. The ranger's suspicions grew deeper when he tried to check these missionaries. Complaint. Characters sent to the indicated address were always returned as impossible. There were no traces of the church and missions on the territory where Kia was said to have left. Their arrival. Devils. Morrison discovered some of them. Critics written by a family of thanks are included. Statements and even identical grammatical errors. Someone will produce these. Morrison ended with a confidential memo to his boss. The question is whether we are dealing with scams, temptations, or worse. Morrison's breakthrough happened when he met a man named Tobias Fletcher at a tavern in Jefferson, Texas. Fletcher was drunk and inconsistent, but his history was consistent enough to send a cold along Morrison's spine. Fletcher said, worked as coal, and as a regular worker due to the curse of tars, and in the central area for almost 2 years. 1870. I thought I had helped him with the Lord's work, Fletcher whispered his hand. I tremble when he reaches the bottle. Mara's brother told me he was blessed to me. Help me clean the shower. However, some of these graves were for the show. Some remain constant and full. He prays for them and announces another saved soul. Forever. But I knew it was really buried there. Follow. Fletcher, he understood that his responsibility was to not only dig, but also eliminate the iconic grave used to clean the ritual. The body of a person who woke up while cleaning. The brothers said that these people achieved such a complete spiritual cleansing, directly to paradise. However, Fletcher saw enough body to discover the difference between natural death and natural death. Murder how Jevian's brothers continued to work with their own hands. Fletcher, his voice barely fell. On the whisper, he said it was soothing, but I saw these hands. He could forcibly torture a person for a few days without killing him or extending him. Information about family, money, and property. Then he was finished when they had everything they needed. Work. Fletcher explained complex operations that go far beyond the simplest. Murder. The brothers removed detailed information about the victim, family ties, assets, trade relations during long sessions of torture. Therefore, they use this information regarding the conclusions of communications with families that are often needed. Money for fictional missionary work, providing a plausible explanation of why missionaries didn't return. Meet at home or personally. Fletcher said, family, sending funds to support the work of your loved ones and spreading the gospel. The brothers have settled down, so money is. Multiple intermediaries are instructed. It's impossible to follow. Some families have been sending money for years, but never knew their son and daughter had died and buried. Inanamelis grave. When Morrison presses Fletcher to get more information about the location. Grain, human behavior has completely changed. I replaced the drunk. Bravado. And he began to look around the tavern as if waiting for a spell. The brothers who embody the shadows. Fletcher, I have eyes everywhere. He stumbled. Suddenly, I was much more calm than it had appeared a few minutes ago. People. Someone who asked too many questions about his siblings. They also had a way to disappear. I shouldn't have said. There is nothing. God will help me. There's nothing to say. That night, Fletcher escaped the tavern and never saw it again. Some said he went to California. Others said he was found dead in a marsh near Lake Cataw. Collison. Although the latter suspects, Fletcher provided sufficient information to reduce research in certain fields. At the Louisiana border, the brothers worked in their last camp, as shown. The information was provided by Fletcher, and it was valuable, deeply surprising. Armed with this intelligence and growth factor of evidence, Morrison knew it was time to take decisive steps. We gathered a small team of trusted rangers to go to the area near Lake Cato. According to information, he checked out his last camp. Travel has experienced some of the most farthest and forbidden. Texas fields, thick forests, where a canopy blocks the sun. Cypress seemed to absorb the sound itself. Morrison's team consisted of 3 other members. Ranger, Sergeant Bill Crawford, a veteran of the Indian War. Chief Miguel Santos Corp, the old Vaccaro with unparalleled surveillance skills. And Soldier David Thompson, a young man whose pointed eyes and stable nerves were giving him a reputation. Exceptional shooter. Each person is chosen as their own discretion and skill. Morrison couldn't put his words in danger. Their investigations reached bad ears. As they approached the area, the Morrison team began to notice a surprising indication that something has not progressed fundamentally into the region. The local wilderness seemed. It's abnormally small. Even insects that normally change tourists in the wet climate of eastern Texas were prominent. Do not have. The few settlers they met. Damn us all, nothing develops properly. There's nothing natural in this place. I warned the old recipient of the name. Ezekiel Marsh. They met a trade station near Marshall. I've been chasing these forests for 30 years. You can tell yourself that the earth near Lake Ein did not approach him, and the person who returned has changed. If you're coming back at all. Description Marsh. Morrison came from other sources. Several witnesses described the forest area where the trees grew. In the strange, perverted model, a place where normal wildlife sounds are silent. Some people attribute it to Indians, funerals, and other supernatural reasons, but Morrison doubted more. An explanation of the world. The presence of large amounts of organic matter decomposition is, of course, they affect the local ecosystem. The team created camps from a few kilometers. Before providing the ransom-evaluated location, the brothers of the Bledging move. Morrison's strategy was to gather evidence that criminals cannot refute. Activities before facing the brothers directly. He knew their religion. The conditions and reputation of a good job will make it difficult to convince the Jew apprentice without surprise. Crime evidence. On the first night, the Rangers heard a distant sound confirming their worst suspicions. In the direction of the night wind, the camp, there was a dirty sound of human suffering. No one recognized what appeared to be a cry. Again, a religious song of language. It wasn't. Someone's cry is suffering from physical pain, and Morrison will later write in his official report. It was a sound. I beg for an absolute soul of suffering, a mercy that never comes. Bad. The game was how she suddenly stopped, and it started again just like a few hours later. The pain became intentionally long. I screamed regularly at night. It can sometimes be accompanied by what appears to be a form of digging noise and ritual. Dawn. Bulk. Morrison and his people have found the courage to achieve preliminary awareness in the area. What are they? Seen in the forest surrounding the camp, they will challenge everything they thought they know the scale. Cursed family crime. The fresh tomb was sprinkled with a Macon-like landscape. Gardens are too many to describe as symbolic elements of religious rituals. Morrison counted over 60 graves, which appear to have been dug over the past year. But each one is marked. There's only one simple wooden cross. But what they found was a smell that convinced Morrison. It's really awful, despite the obvious and unmistakable burial efforts. The smell of decomposition is suspended in the humid air. Thompson, who had it? It served as a medical field for the conflict battles of India, as confirmed by Morrison. Suspicion. This is the smell of many bodies, Captain Thompson said. Fresh and old. Whatever happened here, it lasted for a long time. When the Rangers approached the camp itself, he began to hear the sounds of their blood cold. Rhythms emerged from the biggest tent. The sound of metal meat. Religious spells. The voices delivering the spell were calm and almost conversational. It creates a frightening contrast to the obvious suffering of the victim. Morrison noticed that they witnessed an aggressive torture session, perhaps partially. Fletcher explained the cleansing process. Rangers captain collided. A terrible decision. You risk getting in a hurry and losing the necessary evidence. Expose the full volume of the brother crime, or allow the torture to continue, while they gather information. When a decision is made for him, the scream suddenly stopped and was replaced by an intrusive silence, more surprising than the sound of suffering. Morrison knew they just saw the murder and saw all hope. The salvation of this particular sacrifice has disappeared. Now their priorities were to gather evidence and future prevention. Atrocity. By using manual signals, Morrison deployed his people around the boundary. Camp. What they observe in the next few hours would ensure that they secure the foundation for the most. A significant criminal lawsuit in the history of border activities. The brothers worked. It has the efficiency of a well-created company. Their activities on a specific schedule have been proposed during the year. Experience and refinement. The fact that Morrison and his team witnessed it during their near-future observations. Learn them deeper through investigations and reveal layers by layers of sophistication of crime that challenged everything. They thought they knew about border crime. He recorded a terrible routine. This revealed the true nature of siblings BAJ. Each. The morning began with the fact that it seemed like a legitimate religious service with national anthems and biblical readings. New arrivals will take part in these services and believe they have probably found real spiritual leadership. But as the day progresses, the front of religious devotion gradually gives. The path to something is much more worrying. Individual advice sessions will begin, during which the Cornelius brothers will be. Detailed penalty confessions will be deleted. These sessions often last for several hours, and the Ranger hears more and more desperate pleas from within the confession tent. Brothers, Cornelius has a gift to know exactly what people are hiding. Morrison pointed out in his observational journal, but I begin to doubt this sacred understanding. Long questions coming from more ground sources, combined with psychological manipulation and, perhaps, torture. The brothers improve the system to extract not only awareness but also detailed information about the victim's financial assets, family ties, and everything that is profitable. They will use this information to create compelling communications with family and often continue this. A fictional relationship several months or years after the victim's death. Thompson, a soldier near the camp, said, "See the healing session of Jivia's brothers, which was a torture session designed to actually destroy victim resistance. He has a collection of tools to make Spanish inquisitors, including Thompson. He whispered at one of their evening briefings, and he knows exactly how to use them to cause maximum pain. It's too killing." The most surprising aspect of his brother's tactics was its systematic nature. They have obviously developed their methods over the years. Extract information, create documents, eliminating phone calls. The Morrison camp team observed that it was clearly not the case. Their first, he showed all the indications of well-made operations. Place. The second night of their observations, the Ranger. The brothers called their up-song representation for the Ascension ceremony, murder. Penitent. For several days, the torture was delivered to the center of the camp, where Malahi's brothers preached a long sermon. The blessing of spiritual cleaning. Victims barely perform and show. The obvious signs of long-term violence were then ritually released from the earth. The bond between the Jebius brothers. Morrison wrote to him, "Report. It's a cold and calculated murder committed with precision. Commercial transaction. The religious element is refueling for windows designed to ensure psychological coatings. Explain the casualty of the victim for the criminal. The ceremony concluded that the victim was buried in one of the numbered graves. Deposit." Mala's brothers wrote. Ascension of leather books. The Ranger noticed them. The final stage of the process was probably 100, once in the last 30 years. But the Morrison team also discovered proof that his brother's crimes enjoy far beyond the limits of simple murder. It is hidden in the surrounding forest. They found a camp that looked like a workshop where documents were forged and other criminal acts were planned. The brothers were clearly involved in everything from fake currency to covered scam systems. Some states, we're not just dealing with serial killers, after considering the evidence, we are looking into one of America's most difficult crime companies. History, these people used religion as a cover for each type of crime imaginable and did it. It's been for decades. On the third day of observation, the Morrison team witnessed something that made them abandon their observations and take immediate action. Family of 4. Parents and 2 young children arrived at the camp seeking cleaning the family. As for relatively insignificant moral obstacles, a perspective on how children who are familiar with camps forced it. Morrison cannot wait for backup or additional evidence. I couldn't stand it and could not see it. The children become victims of these monsters. Morrison later explained to his boss, to prove our guilt, we are forced to protect our innocent lives. Morrison. The plan was to stop the siblings during the evening service, but the three of them came together and were relatively not protected. However, the Rangers quickly became the cursed family. It's far more dangerous than expected. The brothers clearly planned the possibility of the law. In response, forced intervention was prepared. When Morrison's team tried to do it, arrested, they faced not only three brothers, but also some armed achievements. Someone who acted as a camp employee. Following him in a shooting lasted almost an hour, leaving them two behind. The death toll reached and Sergeant Crawford was injured. During the fight, the Rangers were fearful. I discovered that there was a very careful degree of repentance in camp. It was broken by their torture. They actually tried to protect the executioner. These victims are clear. He suffers from what is later recognized as a form of psychological condition, and the attacks are. The brothers lead to their own curse. They asked us not to hurt ourselves. Their savior, Soldier Thompson, said, some of them were in a hurry between us. The brothers have convinced us that we are Satan's agents trying to prevent them. Cleaning. That was the most alarming thing I've seen when I saw it. Brothers. They turned out to be great enemies. Mala's brothers were obviously excellent shooters. The massive size and strength of his brother Jivia made him in danger even without his arms, but it was a previous battle. The Cornelius brothers, physically unimpressive, showed supernaturalness. The ability to use and deal with people even in combat. A tactic that disrupts the Rangers and lowers morale. When did the turning point come? Morrison manages to go to the tent, where the brothers keep a note. Internal. He found not only detailed relationships about their crimes, but also evidence of their true character. That's the name of the curse. Pseudonym. The brothers were actually Blackwood families and wanted murder. Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi fraud. All of them were. Lie. Morrison discovered their names, their religious powers, their opinions. Everything is carefully thought out of fiction designed to ensure codings. Their criminal acts. They were false religious fanatics. They were a criminal career that finds the perfect camouflage. Their true personality is revealed. Their files were files at the hands of the organization responsible for the application of the law, and the brothers' resistance began to crumble. One by one, they were. He made a final attempt to escape earlier than the Cornelius brothers, but took one of his children, but was placed in police custody. Hostage of the victim. The conflict that follows shows the actual depth. Brother corruption. When Morrison tried to agree to the release of the child, his brother Cornelius, he calmly explains that the child is already marked for cleaning. This murder of him would actually be an act of mercy. You don't understand. We provide. Brother Cornelius Morrison cooled down. People come to us, sinners, useless. We give their meaning to their meaning. Let them participate in something more than they do. Death during cleaning is the best distinction. You can allow it. It was a Private Thompson stopping the conflict. I placed a shot showing my brother Cornelius being injured without hurting the child. The rest of the results surrendered. Soon, obviously, they admit that their reasons have been lost. Immediately, the threat has been neutralized. The brothers are finally in custody. The Morrison team can begin opening up dark work. The whole thing they fell down. What they will recognize in the next few hours and days. Document their total volume beyond your worst expectations. Crime. What they found in camp and beyond them around. Provided the worst expectations and evidence of criminal activity covering more than 3 decades. The brothers' accounting work was meticulous and awful. Their accounting books. It contains detailed information about more than 400 victims, including names, context, how to execute, and amount extracted. Their family due to fraudulent communication. The file shows that the siblings worked together, at least in 1843, 2 years before he arrived in Texas. Morrison said they kept notes because they were business. Each victim received a number and they followed. All. How much money was stolen? What kind of information was extracted? Whatever. The torture method was more effective for different types of people. It's the coldest systematic approach to murder. We met when we met. The diplomatic evidence was just as bad. The excavation of the numbered grave revealed nearly 200 leftovers. Long torture and death. The victims came from a youth. Elderly people included men and women from all classes of society. Medical diagnosis of the body progressed by Dr. Elizabeth Thornton. Austin and New Orleans medical professionals team. The complex nature of the brothers' torture methods. They clearly studied human anatomy and psychology. Dr. Thornton said their methods have been developed to maximize suffering while retaining the victims. A lot of time. The most shocking discovery. The brothers were able to see the various methods of long-term torture that they had attempted to develop. A more effective way to interrogate. Some victims show signs that they are exposed to many different tortures. Assuming their suffering is a long way. It is used as a form of research. It wasn't just about extracting money and information. Morrison has reached a conclusion. /I. Trust me, these people have received real joy that causes suffering. A religious framework is provided. The justification of their sadistic impulses simultaneously attracts constant offers of vulnerable victims. / Seminar Morrison's team found that she gave additional evidence of criminal diversity in her siblings. In adding false document equipment, they found printed plates for fake religious stolen currency. Artifacts modified for torture and detailed cards. It shows the locations of other camps that took them southwards. It was probably the most worrying thing. Discovering what appeared to be a manual written by the brothers of Malachy. Identification and operation of vulnerable people. Leadership included psychology. Profiles of different types of victims. Ways to gain confidence. Step-by-step instructions to extract each person's maximum value before their death. They turned human exploitation into science. Dr. Thornton took care of him. See administration. Each aspect of their work is designed to maximize profits with risk minimization. Detection. It is a systematic level of evil which challenges understanding. A. Reports from the Brothers Network were revealed when investigators studied them, responding to results under other conditions. The Cursed family wasn't like that. Working alone. There are conflicts, con artists, and even some corrupt employees of the organizations responsible for applying the law are paid to look elsewhere. But the brothers' crimes are far beyond what was found in this only camp. As a word about their arrest, as it is distributed throughout the region, a new flow of information began to flow. There is information that reveals the actual volume of the brothers' criminal enterprises throughout the South. The letter has arrived from the South explaining such camps and suspicious loss. Since the early 1840s, Mrs. Catherine Phillips of Mobile, Alabama wrote to authorities in 1852 explaining about her husband's loss. After visiting a cleaning camp, he is ruled by 3 brothers. I responded to the explanation of the curse. Samuel received a letter from his son for almost 2 years from his departure. For the camp, she explained. The letter explained his missionary work in California and asked for money for her gospel effort. I sent over $800 before the letter. Similar stories have appeared in Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, and even Indians. Region. There was a camp map that worked within 6 to 12 months. Leave only a distant place, an ambiguous story before moving to something else. I left with a successful call. The survey showed that the brothers improved how poor communication systems were operated during the border era. I have it. Working remotely, constantly moving the basics of operations, they made the law almost impossible. Law enforcement agencies monitor or combine disappearances in various jurisdictions. They are. Understanding is better than most police officers, and how to use weaknesses in our system, Morrison pointed out. In his latest report, they carefully chose their locations aimed at the area. They went further forward in places where local governments are overloaded or corrupted. Everyone was able to build a problem with them. The brothers have also developed relationships with corrupt officials. They provided them with improved warnings about the investigation and helped them to establish their false powers. Some, the sheriff, judge, and even some pastors finally took the bribe and got involved in the plot to provide criticism during suspicious behavior or look elsewhere. It was recorded. The financial report of the fraud was amazing. Investigator. He calculated that the brothers extracted more than $50,000 from families with victims. Missionary correspondent fraud plan. The huge amount for the time being represents life. Hundreds of families. However, the psychological damage has been far exceeded. Economic loss. For many years, Southern families believed that their loved ones were doing noble work. Spread the gospel and find out they were killed in a few days. Or the week we went to camp. Revelation has been destroyed not only in individuals, but also in individuals. Family, but in their opinion, the entire community is proud of, which was an important missionary work. Do people think that such calculated evil can be done? The crime of the cursed brother makes us face an unknown question about the nature of evil itself. Share your thoughts. Comment. And if this story covers you, there are thousands of others. Press this button. Subscribe. For a dark puzzle from the American past. Let him continue now. The brothers' final calculation. Increased evidence against justice and public protests have resulted in the trial. To the brothers become one of the closest trials to the history of border worship, and quickly. It became one of the most sensational crime processes in Texas history. Court buildings are packed daily. Audiences, journalists, and families who traveled all the South to testify to justice. The charges led by District Attorney Robert Maxwell faced difficulties. The task of presenting evidence of crimes that have occurred in almost 40 years and in different states. A. The fact that many potential witnesses were killed and most evidence was killed complicated this case. It consisted of his own and detailed files of his brother. Gentlemen, the Jew umpire said Maxwell in his declaration of entry. You'll hear evidence of a very unpleasant crime. It is systematically bad for them to question the fundamental beliefs of our humanity. The defendant was disguised. As a servant of God, he serves only with the perverse desires of wealth. Force, a defense strategy led by prominent lawyer James Worthington, has tried. The brothers were described as false religious fanatics, and their extreme ways of doing so were motivated by reality. Inappropriate mental enthusiasm. Worthington said his brothers, they were believed to have saved their souls, and that all deaths were the unwilling consequences of an overly enthusiastic religion. Practice. My client is guilty of excessive enthusiasm, perhaps even criminal negligence. We discussed Worthington, but they are not cold killers whose accusations make you believe. These are men. They became obsessed with their mission to save their souls and lost sight of the limits of their earthly power. This defense strategy quickly collapsed when the accusations began to present survivors and reading testimonies. Excerpt from the brothers' notes. The methodological nature of their crimes, detailed financial surveillance, and evidence of systematic torture made it impossible to maintain fiction. Religious motivation. The brothers of Malah's brothers were particularly detrimental to protection. Instead of showing repentance or asserting religious excuses, he spoke with a calm pride of their effectiveness, operations, and success to avoid detection over many years. Provided a service that the company needs but doesn't want to admit. Malahi. He testified with a terrifying calm. The borders are filled with broken people with no objective, worth, or hope. They gave them an insignificant life, so they allowed them to contribute to something. That's more than that. Agreement. Even experienced judicial journalists. Death is inevitable for all men. He confirmed that these specific deaths serve as useful purposes. A. The money we removed supported the important work these people never could do. I reached it independently. The Cornelius brothers were also unexplored. During his testimony, he detailed the methods of reconnaissance and financial information. A prosperous business model explains and says as if not admits to torture and murder. People won't admit it. He explained the material. They're guilty of it. the poison of their souls, and the opportunity to provide themselves. My gift was free. They know how to overcome their natural intent and convey the whole truth. Jivia's brother's certificate was probably the most surprising as he described him. A way of torture with the enthusiasm for the master to discuss his work. I'm in pain. Professor, he explained. This removes the pretense and reveals the truth. My hands. They were blessed with the ability to apply accurate, appropriate pressures to achieve the desired outcome. The charges were confirmed by the testimony of Dr. Elizabeth Thornton. Those who gave professional medical indications about the complex nature of victim injuries and torture. The method is used. Ces personnes ont clairement étudié l'anatomie et la psychologie de l'homme. She showed that their methods have been developed to maximize suffering while maintaining the victims. Possible. No professional work, no religious fanatics. The most powerful. The certificate came from a small number of survivors who survived the siblings' cleaning process. These eyewitnesses first provided reports of torture, psychological manipulation, and the systematic murders they witnessed by staying at the camp. Samuel Hartwell, 1847 testimony first raised doubts. Camp returned to testify despite his obvious psychological trauma. That explanation. The cleaning process provided the Jews with detailed understanding. How did the brothers work? They didn't want to kill us. His voice was barely heard in Hartwell. A packed courtroom. They wanted to break us first, the body, the mind, and the heart. Torture was more than just extracting information. They loved to see how we were suffering. Other. Survivors reviewed their Hartwell account and provided additional information on how to do the siblings. Rebecca March, a former prostitute who survived 3 weeks at camp, explained how her brothers used it. Operation to break the victim's resistance. They will tell you that you needed your suffering. Your salvation, she showed. They thanked you for the torture. I convinced you that you deserve it. When they finish with you, you believe that dying is mercy. And this faith will make you a blessing. Most surprising was probably Jacob Wheeler, with a former accomplice who falsely saved his brother before developing his conscience. Run away. Wheeler has launched information on criminal scale. Brothers' long-term business and planning. All this applied to a Lacard. Wheeler shows. They knew exactly how long they could work everywhere. They built before doubt and provided exhaust roads for each camp. There was even a plan to receive it if an unexpected situation occurred. It's too close. Wheeler's testimony shows that the brothers are planning to develop. Their business in California and Oregon has created a new population of people who are hopeless. This is vulnerable to their programs. He explained that they view Western migration as a business opportunity. All these people going west without money and family ties to follow them if they disappear. One of the most shocking moments in the trial came when the charges were revealed. The true character of his brother and crime story. Arkansas judicial protocols show men making phone calls. The family themselves were actually Jacob Cornelius and Josiah Blackwood, brothers who have been sought for murder and fraud since 1841. The Blackwood brothers first worked as a male confidants in Little Rock, Arkansas. Serious crime. Their first known murder took place in 1842 when they killed it. A rich merchant who discovered cheating. Instead of facing justice, they fled. The West has accepted the identity of the deceased minister. They flew to a burned church. All of their religious characters are carefully constructed. Fictional prosecutor Maxwell spoke about the shocked courtroom. They studied legal religious practices. The terminology is sufficient to deceive even an experienced minister. The identity as a cursed family was a carefully thought-out camouflage created to provide. Covers their criminal conduct. The revelation was explained by many. A contradiction that has been bothering investigators for many years. Brothers are a rare interpretation. Christian doctrine dislike communication with other ministers, their constant movements. All places make sense when the behavior of criminals in favor of false identity is considered. DNA evidence also shows that one of the men is called Jibia. In fact, the curse was not linked to the other two brothers. Judicial protocols showed that Jivia was indeed Walter. Grimm is a former soldier who was released from the army during the Mexican War due to cruelty towards prisoners. Grimm joined the Blackwood brothers in the late 1840s and proved to be invaluable to their activities. They included it in their suspected family identity. Rear. Considering within 3 hours, the Jew judge returned the sentence of guilt for all points in the accused three. A. The evidence was so great, so criminal, so sick of it, so we weren't there. Realistic probability of a square. Judge Harrison Caldwell, Hardman, president of many border incidents of justice, sadness reflecting the unprecedented nature. Crime. On the bench for 30 years, he said, I've never met him before. Systematic and calculated properties. Your crime is not just murder and fraud, but an attack on the very foundations of civilized society. Jacob Blackwood, Mara's brother, was sentenced to death and was suspended at age 17. The first version of the murder description. Cornelius Blackwood received by the Cornelius brothers. The same verdict on 12 points of allegations and many points of fraud and torture. Jovian's brother, Walter Grimm. He is more responsible for being sentenced to death in 23 cases of murder. He almost died being one of his partners. The proposal was made on November 15, 1882, in front of a crowd of over 2,000 spectators who traveled to testify of enforcement from all parts of Texas and surrounding states. Flat. The three men showed no regrets about the crimes they had at the gallows. Jacob Blackwood's latest words are a feature of arrogance, and he showed during the test. We gave. Death without goals is a meaningless death because the meaning and purpose of life is lacking. There's history. Even if modern society doesn't have a sufficient vision, it justifies our way. Understand them. Walter Grimm said the latter, and his final statement sent chills through the gathered crowd. There are others like us. We weren't unique. We were more successful than the majority. Borderlock. There are always predators and people who know how to make hopeless and terrible functions work. Curse. The incident was a turning point for law enforcement, leading to new requirements for religious organizations. Increased work in remote areas and cooperation between law enforcement across the state line. This case also highlighted the vulnerability of isolated groups and the need for better communication. A system for monitoring criminal activity in various jurisdictions. Dr. Elizabeth Thornton used it. One of the first complete research in criminal psychology focused on the business experience, writing one of the best studies. Methods used by systematic killers to identify and use vulnerable victims. His work is the basis for modern crime, profiling, and victim protection. The economic impact of Brother Crime Program is their direct sacrifice. The Manami family sent money to support them. Fictional missionary work found. They themselves are being economically destroyed. Some proud communities they believed in. Important evangelical work is devastated from their revelation. The contributions fund murder and torture. Captain James Morrison was increased to majors and placed according to new group targets developed by many states. We investigate criminal organizations working on the state line. A systematic approach to curse studies has become a model for complexes. Criminal investigations in the western United States. The brothers' camp locations remained largely abandoned, and locals said they avoided the locals. He believed that the earth itself was cursed and committed there by atrocities. Today, over a century. Since then, some of the remote areas of eastern Texas where the cursed families worked have been persecuted. The spirits of people who have sought salvation and found only fear. The history of the cursed family forces to resist unpleasant truths about human nature and the obvious possibility of evil exists in civilized societies. There, crime has been made possible not only by one's corruption, but also by the most unprotected social system. Vulnerable members. The brothers knew how to use gaps, so they were successful for a long time. Insufficient communication between border society and jurisdictions and disliked. Exploring the disappearance of social overviews and general hypotheses. This religious activity was inherently a goodwill. They became the highest impulse of society, faith and hope. and the desire for weapon ransom for most people who need protection most. Most worrying is that we probably know that the cursed brother was abnormal or not abnormal. System products that create ideal conditions for predation types. Action. A combination of boundaries between isolation, despair, and weak law. Police have created opportunities for inevitably misused by these, ready to accept absolute evil. Their stories act as constants. Remember that evil often has a mask of justice. Dangerous predators are those who use our deepest mental and emotional needs. In the world, people are looking for meaning, goals, tone sin. They're always ready to offer false salvation. Final price. He claimed that the curse proposed shit salvation, but in the end they proved it. A certain form of curse is much worse than the crime the victim commits once. Their inheritance is written. Grain without identification marks scattered along the U.S. border. Evidence of human evil and depth of price. Inappropriate confidence. What do you think of this dark chapter in the history of the American border? You believe in such a systematic. Can evil exist in our modern world? Where my brother was? Their unique time and place? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I found this story as scary as thousands of other people. Subscribe to our channel and click on it. Notification bells are included as the U.S. border contains more dark secrets. I'm waiting for it to open. Share this video with anyone who appreciates the shadow of history. Please remember that sometimes the greatest evil is glued to salvation. Until next time, beware of those who exploit faith for their perverted purposes.